In a new piece for the Big Substack, friend of the show Matt Stoller dives into the case against cryptocurrency and questions whether traditional financial markets are really all that much better. He writes, quote, skeptics of cryptocurrencies generally believe that they are easily manipulated mechanisms to launder money, commit fraud, evade sanctions, empower dictators, engage in heavily leveraged speculation prone to collapse, and ultimately break the state itself. The response to this concern is easy. Exactly how is this accusation any different than the existing order? End quote. Author and Director of Research at the American Economic Liberties Project, Matt Stoller, joins us now to expand. Glad to have you back. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us how you really feel about crypto. Reading this. I tend to be. I'm by no means any sort of expert on cryptocurrencies, but most people I talk to who know more about the issue than I do seem to think it's kind of like the inevitable future. Do you think is this the direction we're headed? Regardless of what regulators do or the state does.
Well, let's just start with what a cryptocurrency is. So just so people understand, all it is it's a ledger on the internet, and there are markings in that ledger, and there are different ledgers. Some of them are called one of them is called Bitcoin. Every one of these ledgers has a different name, which is a different coin, and that's all it is. They're just ledgers. And then people have imputed to these that these are money. They're just markings in a ledger. And the ledgers kind of have some cool technology, like some neat technology.
Right.
But like they're less efficient than an Excel spreadsheet or any centralized database. But that's all it is. So I know people like to.
That's all money is anyway,
yeah, right?
That's all money
is
just markings on paper.
Yeah. Once we left the gold standard, what's the difference?
See, this is the right question, because that's ultimately what makes cryptocurrency interesting. Is it's a political project. So what makes money a real thing, aside from why isn't it just a marking in a ledger? Money is backed by a state, and you have a state that enforces the value of that money by regulating banks, chartering banks, and having a financial system and regulating that system, taxing and saying these arbitrary markings, you have to pay us in dollars, these arbitrary things that we produce through taxes, or else we send men with guns after you. And then overall legitimacy, people believe that we're in America, and therefore we accept these things called dollars. So if you have a financial crisis, when you have money backed by a state, that state can do things to protect the value of the currency. It can have the Fed lend things out, it can bail out institutions, it can regulate institutions, it can regulate markets. There's someone standing behind it and managing that currency. Cryptocurrency or any other marking doesn't have that. So it's purely premised on belief. And belief works for a while, especially when you have a very bubble, speculative moment, which we have right now. But when you have a crisis, then it doesn't work. Oh, and I guess there's one other thing, that state makes, it protects against fraud, money laundering, counterfeiting, a whole set of practices. Now, the reason that cryptocurrency is gaining so much steam is because the institutions, the state and the regulated banking system, which are supposed to kind of have some legitimacy, are super corrupt. And so people are like, well, what's the difference? It's all corrupt. So why not create, a system of finance that we can control versus those insiders? But that's it's ultimately, all of this is kind of a political project, which is based on the failure of state and liberal institutions and the increasing lack of legitimacy.
Yeah, and Matt, you've done a ton of research on 18th century U.S. politics, 19th century U.S. politics, both for your book Goliath, but also through your work on Capitol Hill. And so you're quite familiar with the different currency battles and currency wars, and the way that currency was very much politicized, throughout the first half of the kind of United States history. We didn't have an actual currency for a very long time, and banks and private institutions would issue their own currencies. It's basically kind of proto-cryptocurrencies in a way. And the creation of the Federal Reserve was sort of an effort to depoliticize what had been a central political fight throughout throughout this period of time, which was also creating panics every 20 years or so. And it obviously didn't take it out of politics, but what it did is it moved it away from kind of democratic control by moving it into the Federal Reserve. And so now you again have crypto advocates saying that they're sort of depoliticizing money or currency, but in fact they're actually kind of in a way repoliticizing it. So how do you think about crypto as it relates to the currency fights of the 19th century, and what similarities or differences, what lessons do you draw from the 19th century about what crypto, where it's headed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And money is a political commodity, right? It's created by a state and managed by a state, and it reflects the values of a state and the strengths or weaknesses of a state. So what was happening in the 19th century is that we were forming a state. And for the first half of the 19th century, we called it these United States until the Civil War, and then it became the United States, because it wasn't totally clear if states or the federal government were in control of the sovereign power. And it's not a coincidence that kind of the modern national, not modern, but the national financial system was created, the Banking Act of 1863, which was during the Civil War. Like Abraham Lincoln, in many ways, got rid of state level banks or their power, and said, you can't issue dollars. Dollars are going to be controlled by the federal government. It was in the process of state formation. So what crypto people are effectively saying today is, we don't like this national state that we have. We think it is corrupt and collusive. We think the Fed, which is a nationalizing institution, and these large banks, which are nationalizing institutions, these are corrupt. We don't want to recognize their legitimacy. We want to attack them by forming a sort of separate realm of money, or money-like instruments that we can use. They're not really useful. Like, these technologies don't really work. But what you do see is they are used for things like money laundering and fraud and speculation. But ultimately, like, the reason they are used for those things is because they're outside of the realm of the state. The state can't, presumably, so far has not touched them. But fundamentally, this is an attack on the state and the idea of America as a nation state itself. And those were some of the debates that we were having in the 19th century.
Well, the founding of the country, the founding fathers did not want to have a central bank. And so the having a central bank was fought against for 100 years or longer in this country until the Fed was finally created in the early 1900s. So this really is kind of going back to... Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, they disagreed on it. Hamilton chartered one, and very much wanted one. The first Treasury Secretary, and then, as Matt writes about, they let it expire, and then after they let it expire, they found out they didn't know how to finance a war, and they got their White House burned down by the British, and so rechartered a bank, and then they unchartered it. They unchartered it again, and then again realized that they couldn't finance war and expansion, and so they rechartered it. Like Matt said, you need that type of thing for state formation, and the goal and the role of crypto is state deformation in a lot of ways. But Kim, go ahead.
That's probably why
Right, and that's why a lot of people do like the idea of crypto, is that it kind of goes back to that, away from the state control, and going back to that kind of original, what many of the founding fathers did want, which was this non-central bank idea. And that, so it's going back to that. I mean, people do like that decentralized reason for crypto. I don't know if I would agree with, this is, I'm sure it's used for money laundering and other things, but so is regular money. So is state-controlled regular money. We have all kinds of evasion and money laundering going on with that stuff. So it doesn't even, so to say, well, that's why we shouldn't have crypto, I mean...
And there was this photo going viral on Twitter yesterday of a police dog who, I think it was in an airport, alerted the police, and it's like, a good job, K9 unit, you found that this person was carrying a bunch of cash, and it was seized as part of asset forfeiture, but the person is accused of no crime. They just took all their cash, and they're gonna have some great difficulty in getting it back. I think it's that kind of thing that makes people more interested in crypto when the government, is unaccountable and careless and, taking resources from people unjustly. We'll give you the last word on this subject, Matt, is that, if the government wants to, expand into this or wants to regulate this, doesn't it have to win people's trust as a bare minimum?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the compelling point. I mean, all this stuff is a scam, and everybody knows that like cryptocurrency is a cynical scam peddled by like basically a group of con artists and venture capitalists and dictators. I mean, it's not a good arrangement. But like, why is it so compelling? If like Bitcoin goes up and that's not a currency, like basically everything that they promise is like doesn't work. So why is it so compelling? And the reason it's so compelling is exactly what you said, which is, well, I mean, the existing governance systems seem incredibly corrupt and are very hard to defend. So like both of these, the anti-monopoly movement, which is what I work on, and the crypto movement both came out of the financial crisis when everyone was like, how dare you bail out the big banks and foreclose on us? And one movement said, let's reform our existing political institutions and nation. And the other, the crypto people are essentially they're sort of a variant of the defund the police argument, which is to say, get rid of monetary sovereignty, get rid of state formation. It's a fringe position when you actually spell it out. It's like not what people actually want, but it does hinge on the lack of legitimacy of the state itself. And I think we have a really serious problem there, and that our government and our democratic institutions, like we the people, have not done a very good job self-governing, and that's why crypto is so popular right now.
Yep, sounds right. Matt, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
And we will have more Rising right after this.